Subnautica, the only game where you can go from this to this.
Oh my god! Oh my god! Die! Just stop me!
Subnautica is a game that I started a little over 7 months ago, and over the course of those months, I really fell in love with this game. And because of that, I wanted to make a proper review of it so that you guys can both understand my thought process, and if you were to ever ask me, is this game good? Is this game bad? I can point you in the right direction rather than having to repeat myself over and over again to every single person who asks. The first and most important thing that I want to do before I get any further into the video is give you my final score and tell you to go play this game if you have not already before I spoil a fair amount of it. I'm not going to go into heavy story spoilers, but I'm probably going to go through most of the areas of the game, and I don't want to spoil that for people who have not played without warning them ahead of time. So for the final score, Subnautica is about the highest 8 out of 10 that I can give to a game, and again, if you haven't played it, you need to go play it. This game is phenomenal and it's a lot of fun. That being said, there very well will be spoilers, whether it be story spoilers or environmental spoilers going forward, so you have been warned. The first thing I want to do is talk about everything that I liked about Subnautica, and there's a lot here, so there's no way I'm going to cover it all, and while I'll probably gloss over a few things, know that that 8 out of 10 score really does represent how I feel about the game. And even if I can't exactly put it into words, what exactly I love about this game, it is phenomenal. I think the most notable and probably the most important thing about the game is that it looks incredible. The environments on Subnautica are truly something that are breathtaking to behold. Aside from maybe the dunes and the crater's edge, there's not really anywhere you can go in this game where you won't be engaged by the environment. It's very clear that the level designers were extremely passionate for this game and worked tirelessly to make sure that every single environment was interesting. And they managed to do that with flying colors, and it's truly impressive. But of course, with those environments, you have to have creatures to complement them. And the creature design in this game, once again, is really, really well done. Stumbling across new things for the first time will never not be exciting while playing this game. Whether it be the sheer terror of running into a Reaper Leviathan the first time, or the awe of realizing just how large the Sea Dragon Leviathan is, the creatures in this game will never cease to be interesting. One of the things that makes those creatures so terrifying, though, is some of the best sound design that I've heard in a game, hands down. In fact, I think I would go as far to say that Subnautica just straight up has the best sound design in a game I've ever played. There were multiple times during my playthrough where I called the sound designer a genius but an asshole, and I think I'd probably stand by that. The sound design in Subnautica does a phenomenal job of not only always sounding in place for where you are, but also keeps you second guessing yourself if you really did hear something in the distance by consistently keeping ambient noise up and making it match the environment. Something as simple as the small creaking sounds from a wreck as you pass by may make you second guess that there's something out there that's coming to get you. There were times in the game where the rumbling of my breathing apparatus would go off, and I would think that there was a Reaper there, and there was nothing. And that alone is just brilliant. I don't know if it was on purpose, but it's really well done. Subnautica also boasts an incredibly good sense of progression. The way Subnautica handles progression is twofold. Number one, you have to go out and find blueprints from your crashed wrecked ship, the Aurora. And then, in order to actually make some of these blueprints, you need to scan and find wild flora and fauna, and those will unlock the ingredients to make those blueprints you've scanned. This succeeds in two aspects. Number one, it makes it so that you're always interested whenever you run across a wrecked section of the Aurora, but it also means that when you're going into new biomes, you're always going to be invested to take a look at all of the stuff that that biome has to offer in order to see if there's new stuff you can make. And finally, the last thing on my list of positives is that the story is engaging. I don't think it's any sort of masterpiece, but that being said, I was engaged from start to finish, and I think that that in of itself is important. And while there are, I'm sure, a lot more good things that I can talk about with those games, those are just the things that immediately come to mind when it comes to what is good about Subnautica. That being said, it's not all good, and so people by this point in the video are probably asking themselves, Eclipse, why were 2 points docked from this game? You've been talking about all this good stuff, why is it an 8 out of 10 instead of a 9 or a 10? And this is where I'm gonna tell you. So let's talk about the negatives of Subnautica. The biggest negative in the entire game is the leviathans. I know, that sounds really strange, but I'm not kidding. The hostile leviathans in this game are, in my opinion, the biggest issue with it, and that's for a variety of reasons. Starting off with the, quite frankly, questionable AI. The game developers clearly wanted to scare you away from the leviathans, and the more you interact with them, the more you start to really see why. Because the leviathan AI, well, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and it's just sort of whack. The number one thing is that if you go in circles, a leviathan can just never hit you. This is enough to basically ruin the entire game if you know about it early. I figured out about it by accident and then left it out of every single one of my episodes of Subnautica and basically told myself, I'm not going to do this because if I do, it will just completely ruin all of the tension in the game. I'm not even joking. You literally can just go circles around the Leviathan and they cannot catch you. You will take no damage. Eventually they'll give up and just leave. I think it makes perfect sense if you can run away from the Leviathans, which you can. But the fact that if one aggro's on you, you can just kind of play Looney Tunes and go in circles is so stupid. Moving on, there are way too many Leviathans in this game. Here's a map of all the Leviathans just on the surface of the game. We're not talking about in the caverns or anything. Look at all these Reapers. Why are there so many Reapers? The sheer amount of Leviathans, Reaper Leviathans in particular, really takes away from the wonder of finding Reapers when you start to realize that they're just absolutely everywhere. The problem here is that there's a very good reason, as far as I understand, why there are so many Leviathans. And the reason is that there can only be so many entities rendered from so far of a distance. So, for example, if we went to the Aurora and there was only 1 or 2 Reapers and they were swimming around, you would very, very easily, realistically be able to avoid them. Now, I think that this amount of Leviathans in the game seriously works against the game rather than working for it. The problem with the Leviathans is that they're predictable, which is the last thing that you want in this kind of enemy. They're always going to be in the same spot. They're always going to be the same amount of them in these same spots. And if you get far enough away, they just de-render and despawn. Now, let me pose to you this. How much better would it have been if the Leviathans were significantly more random? What if there were, instead of like 7 Leviathans surrounding the Aurora, there were only 2 of them? But because there were only 2 of them, they would consistently patrol the entire Aurora rather than just being in their predetermined spots. That means that if you were anywhere around the Aurora, you were never really safe. At any given moment, the Reaper could show up. That would be a lot more nerve-wracking than if they were just sitting in one spot, effectively going in circles. The other big problem with the Leviathans, and the reason that I think there's so many in the game, well, it's the stasis rifle. It's hard not to bring up the Leviathans without bringing up this thing. Part of me thinks that Subnautica may have been a better game without the stasis rifle in it. It effectively trivializes every single enemy in the entire game. That being said, I don't necessarily think that there's anything wrong with the stasis rifle trivializing a set amount of enemies. For the smaller enemies like bone sharks and warpers, I think it's perfectly reasonable to effectively have a hard counter to those enemies. It's good for progression, and it's good for the player in order to get rid of some of these smaller nuisances without taking damage. But the fact that you can permanently stun lock every single Leviathan in the game, yeah, that's a bit of a problem. And it's also the reason that I think there are so many Leviathans in the game. The developers behind this game very clearly didn't want there to be only 2 leviathans around the ship, and then you just freeze and kill both of them, and now there's none. They wanted to make it as miserable and obnoxious as possible to get rid of all the leviathans. And in order to do that, it looked like they did 2 things. Number 1, they made them have a ton of health, and number 2, they made it so that there was a lot of them. Because the only 2 leviathans where there aren't a lot of them are the ghost leviathans, which have significantly more health, and the sea dragon leviathan, which can't take damage from the thermal blade, which is like half the damage if you're using a normal knife. I think it's clear that the developers didn't really want you to fight the leviathans, but I also think that that's sort of a shame in of itself, because there are weapons in this game. There are torpedo launchers, but there's no actual mechanics for fighting the leviathans. And because of that, all we're left with is stun, stab, which isn't very much fun. If the goal was make it so that leviathans are an insurmountable force that you can't beat, then they should have just made them invulnerable and made it so that there wasn't very many of them, but then they'd be really scary if they showed up. But instead, they tried to have their cake and eat it too. So they wanted you to avoid leviathans, but they still made them killable. And I feel like they should have just picked one or the other. Either you can progress to a point where you can fight the leviathans and then it's an actual fun fighting mechanic, or you can't kill them at all. Because this weird middle ground just doesn't work, and it makes exploring some of the areas of the map miserable when there's just like 15 leviathans surrounding the whole area. The last issue with leviathans, it's clipping issues. How could it not be? The leviathans clip into absolutely everything, especially the sea dragon leviathan. I consistently cut it out of my playthroughs because I felt like it was so bad that it would ruin some of those recordings. It's not just the leviathans, a lot of other things also clip through the terrain, but with the leviathans, it's extra egregious. They don't just clip through the terrain though. We talked about that stasis rifle earlier, and stasis rifle shots consistently clip through leviathans. You can hit the thing head on and it might just go right through and say, I don't care. That is ridiculous. I feel comfortable saying that the clipping issues on the leviathans is unforgivable. Some quick Google searches will tell you that Subnautica came into early access in 2014, released in 2018, and just a week ago got an update in 2022. The game's had a playable build for almost 8 years. And you're gonna tell me that in those 8 years, no one thought it was a problem that leviathans just clipped through the map all the time? How was this not a priority? There's no way you could play through the game and not notice with how often it happens. There's no way. Anyways, if it were up to me when it came to leviathans, I would make it so that they cannot be frozen by the stasis rifle. There's a significantly reduced amount of them, but make them patrol much larger areas and be far less predictable. I would also make it so that there was actual combat mechanics to fight them off if you really wanted to. Maybe if you manage to do a significant amount of damage, the leviathan flees, but it's still in the area, and it will just be nerfed the next time you see it. And maybe if you mess it up enough, it will run away from you instead of you having to attack it. And then you don't necessarily have to kill it, but it's not gonna attack you because it knows it cannot mess with you. I don't know. I think stuff like that would just be far more interesting than either completely avoiding like 30 leviathans or freezing them with a stasis rifle and stabbing them to death. That's my issue with leviathans. I know, I went on a long time, but the other 2 things on here, hopefully I can run through a little bit quicker. The next one is very similar to the clipping issues, and it's pop-in. I don't think there's any way you could talk about Subnautica without bringing up the pop-in. Pop-in can straight up ruin the game at times, and if you can't look past the pop-in, you will not enjoy this game. You cannot enjoy this game. There is no point when you're playing this game where things will not be popping into existence directly in front of you, and it's throughout the whole game. It never stops. I think I'm at the point where I've played the game long enough that I just sort of blot it out of my mind and I don't really notice, but when I first started playing, it was very hard to look past. If you're going at any amount of speed, things will not be there, and then suddenly they will be. There's no grass, now there is. There's no rock, now there is. It's not good. It's a serious problem, and I'm sure it has a lot to do with technical limitations, so I don't even think it's fixable necessarily, but like I said, I can't not mention it. And the last thing is kind of a nitpick, but it also has to do with the direct end of the game. So if you don't want to know about the end of the game, I mean, it's not really a spoiler. You leave the planet. Shocking, I know. Even after you've gotten the rocket platform blueprint, there's no part of the game that shows you what resources you need in order to build the rest of the rocket. The only way you can find out is by building the rocket platform and then looking at the rocket platform build area and then hovering over it, and it will tell you. This happens for every single piece of the rocket. Thankfully, I decided to cheese by accident because I didn't see it on there, look on Google in order to find out what I needed, and then found out about this after the fact. So I got saved inadvertently from this grind fest. This is right at the end of the game. By now you've been playing for a long time. I don't understand why the developers felt the need to pad out the game so badly at this point. And it's even worse because there's no way to prepare for it other than just collecting a shitload of stuff before you get back to your base after releasing the hatching enzymes. So realistically, I probably would have enjoyed the ending basically not at all if I hadn't Googled it. It would have just made me upset. I would have gotten back to my base, built the platform, walked up and went, oh, I need more shit. Went down, got the shit, came back, made the one thing, and then realized I need more shit. Leave, come back, need more shit. Leave, come back, and it's just like, why did you have to do that? Why couldn't you just tell us exactly what is needed, and then you can go make it, and then that's the end of it. You can leave the planet. I don't really know. It's the same sort of deal with the time capsule, albeit far less of an issue. In order to leave the planet, you need to make a time capsule, which requires you to put items in the time capsule, leave a screenshot, and put in some text. And because it requires you to get a screenshot, but doesn't tell you any of that before you actually get there, if you've never taken a screenshot, you'll have to go back out, go get a screenshot of something interesting, or just take a random screenshot right there. If you've already gone through the process of turning on every single other part of the ship, and then you get up to the time capsule and you're like, oh, I need a screenshot, it just derails what otherwise can be a really engaging and fun ending to the game. It feels triumphant to throw all those switches and get your ship ready to go, and then all of a sudden you're just stopped and you need to go, oh, I need to think about this time capsule. I wonder what I should put in it, and I need to go get a screenshot. And it's like, why can't we just not ruin this ending and get up into space? I don't know. But really, other than those things, that's about it. There's not too many bad things to talk about when it comes to Subnautica. As I said before, the game is an 8 out of 10. I think it's the highest 8 out of 10 that I can give, and I really wanted it to be a 9, but I can in good faith give it a 9 based almost entirely on how long it took the game to be developed versus what got fixed. Like, if you told me that the game's been out for 8 years, I probably wouldn't believe you. In fact, I just straight up wouldn't believe you. Some of those very clear, glaring issues should have been fixed, and I don't know how they weren't. But none of those things are enough to ruin the otherwise really, really solid game. And because of that, I still feel totally comfortable giving it an 8 out of 10. That being said, I've said it 100 times, I'll say it 100 more. If you haven't played Subnautica, I cannot recommend it enough. If you've got a console or a PC that can run it, play this game. With that though, I'm done here. If you enjoyed the video or you have something to say about the review, feel free to leave a comment, like, and subscribe. If you didn't, don't do those things. And with all that being said, have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you guys next time.